This week in Idaho, Boise is all over the news, being listed as a sanctuary city by DHS, and one of its school districts faces a second $50 million claim, and its Pride Kickoff fails. Plus, Idaho Power proposes to hike power rates. We'll look at what you'll be paying if they pass. That and so much more. This is the Yokel Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you an overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Welcome, glad to have you here with us today. If this is your first time listening to us, glad to have you. If you like this show as you go through it, you can also see more of our content over on our Substack, and that's also a way for you to support us if you're a regular listener of the show. All that said, I hope you all had a blessed week. I also hope you've been able to keep up with it. I know for myself and others, May has been a blur between graduations and weddings and different things. Plus, the weather's just nice. It's enjoyable to be outside. You've got Memorial Weekend and other things to go do stuff with. It goes by rather quickly. So hopefully you were able to keep up with it all and you're still standing and have a little bit of breath into it. Also, speaking of things to give you a heads up about so that you're not just spinning your wheels like crazy, because I also feel like holidays sneak up on us rather quickly nowadays. Not quite sure if that's a problem or just a symptom of the modern times, but that said, Father's Day is approaching on June 15th, so it doesn't sneak up on you there. I know I was hearing rumblings about it, and I thought, wait, did we pass it? Oh, wait, no, that was Mother's Day. We passed that. Now we have Father's Day coming up, so if you want to not be caught flat-footed on that, just a heads up. And then also, if you're down here in the southern part of the state, / central, I guess in eastern, you could also come over for it. One of the larger festivals in the area will be happening on the 11th to 14th. That will be the Emmett Cherry Festival. Cannot recommend it enough, especially for the cherries. They are delicious. You can pick a lot of them, or if you come like a week later, it's sometimes better. But the parade they have downtown is really special. Plus, if you can, drop by the museum that they have there. They do a museum comes to life thing for each one of the festivals, which is really nice, where they have people explaining different things and they're in attire for it, and they just open it up wide, and it's a wonderful experience. So if you have time for that next week, highly recommend it. That said, Boise is going to be the main topic with news about the power hikes, but for the middle, we'll be going into the courtroom and also reporting on Medicaid reforms here in Idaho, as we need a waiver to enforce our past plans for that. Plus Trump's AI order, just a little bit of a friendly hint there if you want to go see that. And also closing out, we'll have news on hydropower, something that is very important to Idahoans in the States, particularly for our AC units as the weather heats up, but also for agriculture, an inclusive park in Boise, and a new bridge in Star, Idaho, courtesy of Horseshoe Bend. Lots of good stuff to get to. But with any further ado, we'll jump into it here with our first story, which you've been waiting for. The Department of Homeland Security labeled Boise as a sanctuary jurisdiction last week, placing the city on a list with over 500 locations nationwide. DHS claims these places obstruct federal immigration enforcement through, quote, non-compliance with federal law enforcement in enforcing immigration laws, restrictions on information sharing, and legal protection for illegal aliens, end quote. As for reactions from Boise, Mayor McLean pushed back, stating, quote, Boise is not a sanctuary city, end quote. She emphasized that the city hasn't received official notice from DHS explaining why Boise made the list. The mayor noted that Boise doesn't control Ada County jails and follows immigration law requirements, which to the most part, yes. Granted, there's the letter of the law and then there's the spirit of the law, as we all know very well. And then a fascinating / puzzling part of this situation, Idaho law actually prohibits sanctuary cities. And our legislature has passed bills, particularly this last session, restricting assistance for unauthorized immigrants. However, Boise does hold a welcome city status through the Welcome America, which shows commitment to supporting immigrants and refugees without protecting undocumented individuals or illegal individuals from federal enforcement. Got to be careful with those liberal words there. Adding to the confusion, DHS removed the entire list from its website last Monday, facing criticism from multiple jurisdictions. Some cities complained they were incorrectly included, similar to Boise. The title and list shows how DHS is trying to shed light on cities fighting the administrative's goals, but in the process it seems they have been a little too liberal, for once, with the cities cited. The updated list will be interesting, to say the least, to look at. And staying in Boise, the Boise School District faces another major legal challenge as parents filed a second $50 million tort claim last Thursday. The latest claim involves Cynthia Mann Elementary, where Gavin Snow worked before transferring to the Valley View Elementary. Snow, for context, if you didn't watch one of our previous midweek reports, is a 22-year-old special education assistant that died by suicide in January when police tried to arrest him on child sexual abuse charges. The first tort claim, filed in April, focused on his time at Valley View, so this is just going further down the line. Parents at Cynthia Mann now say the district failed to investigate complaints about Snow during his 2023 employment there. The claim accuses Principal Jeff Farley and district officials of negligent hiring and retention. Now, here's where the troubling part comes in for most of the parents. The district cannot confirm Snow's work schedule at Cynthia Mann using badge logs or payroll records. Instead, officials are relying on employee memories from years ago. This means the district cannot assure parents that Snow was never alone with special education students, his role that he was trained in, or that he didn't abuse children while at Cynthia Mann. The parents represent a nonverbal autistic child who attended Cynthia Mann. Their attorney seeks damages exceeding $50 million for pain, suffering, and psychological harm. The district previously told parents that Snow's incident was, quote, isolated to Valley View, despite knowing police seized multiple electronic devices that could reveal a longer pattern of abuse. And speaking of another story, we kind of went back and forth for the head story on this one. Boise Pride organizers canceled their June 6th Pride season kickoff event, citing insufficient ticket sales despite what they call strong online enthusiasm. The event was scheduled to take place at the Knitting Factory with tickets priced between $32 and $72. I can't imagine paying that much for that. I won't even pay hardly that for a movie, but, I'm a penny pincher. But as for their defense on this, organizers admitted that they failed to generate the community buy-in needed for the event outside of their September festival. Quote, "We remain committed to growing pride in Boise, but it takes more than excitement, it takes showing up," the Boise Pride wrote on Facebook. The cancellation, and the implications from that, comes as Idaho and the rest of the nation continues to push back against LGBTQ plus, elemental P if you want to put it in there, initiatives. Earlier this year, as you may know as well if you're a regular listener, the state passed House Bill 96, which restricts which flags can fly on government property, namely the official ones, which, to spite this bill, this caused Boise's mayor to adopt the pride flag as the official city flag in defiance so that she could actually still fly it. While the Pride event struggles to find support, however, and more broadly, Mark Fitzpatrick's Old State Saloon plans a heterosexual awesomeness fest for June 20th to 21st at Cecil Andrews Park. The counter event promises, quote, "a full-on celebration of family values," end quote, and will offer discounts on XX and XY chromosome holders. Idaho Liberty Dogs as well also celebrated the Pride event's cancellation on Facebook, calling it a, quote, "a win," end quote, and thanking those who previously protested similar events. In conclusion, the canceled event reflects the tension between Boise's liberal leadership and Idaho's overwhelming conservative values. We might say a little bit of a correction. And speaking of power, just less in the political and more in the electrifying way, Idaho Power just filed with the state regulators to raise our electrical rates by 13% starting next January. The company wants to collect an extra $199 million annually to cover the state's growing costs. If approved, the average household using about 900 kilowatt hours monthly would pay about $22 more each month. As for what they plan to do and spend this money on, that would be about $73 million on energy production, $53 million on grid upgrades, $25 million on wildfire protection, particularly if you remember the Boise fire, and $20 million on additional workers. The company also wants to raise their basic service charge from $15 to $25 monthly. But for context, even with this increase, we'd still pay less than most Americans, something I alluded to last week. Idaho residents pay around 11 cents per kilowatt hour, while the nation's average hits about 17 cents. Sounds like a small difference, but it adds up kind of like fuel. And to put it in a little bit of context for the Pacific Northwest, our neighbors in Oregon pay about 14 cents, and Washington pays about 12. The public utilities, though, will review the request over several months and take public comments. Customers on that can weigh in at puc.idaho.gov if you want to affect that and disagree with those changes. Despite all this and the sticker shock, if it still goes through, Idaho's rates would remain among the nation's lowest. Pause there 1 minute. If you've enjoyed so far, do us a favor and hit the subscribe and follow button on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter. It helps us stay connected with you and engage more folks about Idaho so they can be well informed. And speaking of another hot thing in the news, you probably heard a ton about AI. Our Attorney General Labrador has joined forces with 28 other states attorney generals to confront Meta over disturbing reports about their AI assistant. Meta AI, for a little bit of context, operates Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, allegedly exposed children to sexually explicit content, and allows adults to practice grooming minors. The investigative report that they're quoting here revealed that Meta's AI personas engaged in graphic sexual conversations with users who claim to be minors. In one shocking case, an AI persona using John Cena's voice described a sexual encounter with someone posing as a 14-year-old girl and even acknowledged the act was illegal. Quote, "The report concerning Meta AI's exposing children to sexually explicit content and enabling virtual grooming are deeply alarming," Labrador stated. The coalition demands Meta answer whether they intentionally removed safety protections and if they plan to stop this dangerous feature. Fortunately, though, our state legislature acted ahead of this crisis. Surprising to say that government was actually ahead of the curve. Last year, we passed House Bill 465, which criminalizes AI-generated child exploitation content, and we've actually convicted someone on that. We talked about it last week. You can go check that out. Meta has until June 10th to respond to the coalition's demands. And speaking of something just as earth-shattering as AI, water, something that we all depend on very much here in Idaho and around the world as human beings. Coeur d'Alene residents face a steep water bill increase as the city grapples with aging infrastructure and soaring costs. The water department wants to raise rates and fees significantly to fund critical upgrades. Specifically looking at the details, the City Council will meet Tuesday at 6 p.m. in the library to discuss the proposal. If approved, a public hearing would happen July 15th with new rates starting August 1st. The numbers, though, are staggering to say the least. A 1-inch water meter that costs about $5,593 today would jump to $16,404 by 2028, nearly tripling. The city also wants annual rate increases for 5 years. Now, the obvious question would be, why the dramatic hike? The city pumps about 40 million gallons daily during summer, mostly for lawns. Peak morning irrigation demands exceed what the wells can pump, forcing them to rely heavily on storage tanks. New wells, as you might think, why don't we dig more, cost up to $3.5 million and take years to build, so not quite as much of an option as they want, and they need to get the money to build them. Currently, Coeur d'Alene residents pay about $23.77 on average monthly for their water bills, far less than Moscow's $96.62 or Lewiston's $96.58. While nobody likes higher bills, property infrastructure protects our community's future and property values, so it may be quite a worthy investment, though very much stinging. And going back to the topic of Labrador, for the second time, Judge Jonathan Mendema has rejected Attorney General Labrador's attempt to avoid answering questions under oath about firing Deputy Attorney General Daphne Huang. The judge dismissed Labrador's motion to quash his deposition subpoena on Friday, stating that, quote, "answers can only be provided by the Attorney General himself," end quote. For a little bit of context, Huang filed a whistleblower lawsuit in September of 2023. after Labrador fired her for allegedly raising ethical concerns about a $72 million in childcare grants distributed by the Health and Welfare. The judge limited Labrador's deposition to 2 hours, restricting certain questions about his thought process, but ruled he must explain why he chose to terminate Huang. Judge Mendema also sanctioned the AG's office for Labrador skipping an earlierly scheduled deposition. Labrador's office maintains Huang was fired for legitimate performance issues, not retaliation. The situation raises important questions about accountability and transparency in our state government's handling of public funds and personal decisions. And speaking of another thing that, who knows, it might even get some legal challenges, Idaho lawmakers met Friday to examine how House Bill 138 will reshape our state's Medicaid program. The bill, which passed the House with 38 in favor and 32 against in February, requires federal waivers to continue Medicaid expansion or risk losing the program entirely. Representative Jordan Redmond, who sponsored the bill, joined the meeting remotely from Washington, D.C., defending his reform as necessary to, quote, keep care available without expanding spending beyond what the program can sustain, end quote. The change will hit providers hard. Idaho's Health Connections program will end in 2026 due to funding cuts. Granted, it also comes with greater accountability of who is actually getting Medicaid and that it's for the most ill-fortunate in our society. As for objections, Deputy Director Juliet Charon warned that providers must, quote, shift business models, end quote, as the state unwinds these services. The timing is concerning for some, since Idaho hasn't increased Medicaid reimbursement rates since 2008. Some might see that as not being a bad thing. Representative Josh Wheeler compared the situation to, quote, the fox asking the hens how they're doing, end quote, when discussing managing care oversight. In conclusion, some providers now consider dropping Medicaid patients entirely. The state promises to monitor the transition carefully while balancing fiscal responsibility with patient access. Hey, 1 minute. I know we've been talking about a lot of great stuff there, but just a friendly reminder, if you know someone that's using Medicaid, or on the flip side, you also know someone in Coeur d'Alene or any of the stories we've talked about that would really benefit from knowing about this news, please don't hesitate to share it. Your shares help us spread the news about what's going on in our beautiful state and help Idahoans be informed and engaged on what's going on. And speaking of money and funding, the Idaho Secretary of State's office has fined Take Back Idaho PAC $100, not a huge amount in the grand scheme of things, for failing to report election expenditures properly. This fine comes as Idaho Dispatch investigated reports that the PAC used funds to advertise a voter guide without proper campaign finance disclosures. Looking at the details, the confusion started when Gregory Graff, who manages Take Back Idaho, promoted the voter guide through his personal blog, Political Potatoes, instead of the PAC's official channels. This led the Secretary of State's office to initially fine Graff personally before reassigning the penalty to Take Back Idaho PAC. Graff received about $75,000 from Take Idaho Back for management services, but voters couldn't connect the dots between his personal blog advertising and the PAC's responsibility to report these expenditures. When people saw Political Potato as a sponsor on Facebook, they found no corresponding filings in the state's campaign finance database. This case does highlight why campaign finance laws matter. They help voters understand who funds political messaging. Clear reporting requires protecting transparency that keeps our elections accountable and that we can trust them. And stepping out of money and bringing Trump into the room, President Trump has picked our own state representative, Kevin Andrus, from Lava Hot Springs to lead the Idaho Farm Service Agency. Trump's Agricultural Secretary, Brooke Rollins, announced this last week as part of what she calls Trump's, quote, Farmers First agenda. For context for those that haven't heard about him before, Andrus brings solid credentials to this role. He chaired our House Agricultural Committee and knows farming firsthand after raising cattle and horses himself. He has also worked as a loan officer at Ireland Bank, so he should understand the financial side of agriculture. As for what the agency is, it helps our farmers access federal programs and implement agricultural policies across the state. With someone who has actually worked the land now running things, we should hopefully see policies that make sense for those that feed us. Also, there's a little bit more there. Trump has also tapped former Representative Rick Youngblood to direct Idaho rural development. Youngblood served 5 terms in our legislature and chaired the appropriations twice. This creates an open seat in District 35 with Andrus. The governor will need to find someone to fill his spot, so we'll have to see where he chooses. Secretary Rowland says these picks show Trump's commitment to, quote, empowering rural America and unleashing economic prosperity, end quote. Having agricultural farmers in charge instead of bureaucrats sounds like a step in the right direction. And speaking of what makes up many farming communities' families, Idaho continues to lead other conservative states in supporting working families. Governor Little signed orders in 2025 and 2024 to give state workers 8 weeks of paid leave when they have babies, adopt children, or foster kids. With that in mind, this year Alabama, Iowa, and Mississippi joined our state and 37 others in offering these benefits. Looking at Alabama, their representative Ginny Shavers watched her teaching daughter struggle after giving birth. Quote, she had complications and used up her leave before she even had the baby, Shavers explained. The new Alabama law passed almost unanimously in the Republican legislature. Many GOP governors now call their states pro-family when they sign these bills. They argue that states must compete with private companies to keep good teachers and workers. As for Iowa and Mississippi, though, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds and Mississippi House Speaker Jason White both tied their new leave policies to being pro-life states. A little separate because pro-life has to do with abortion, but, I can see the connection. They conclude that they want to support families after children arrive, not just before. Our state workers, though, have already enjoyed this benefit for many years, with most private sector employees lacking it, however. So a little bit of a win for governments there. And speaking of Trump again, he has signed an executive order in April that will bring artificial intelligence education to schools across our state and others. The Advanced Artificial Intelligence Education for Youth Order creates a federal framework to teach students how to use AI tools responsibly. The order establishes a White House task force led by Michael Kratios that will organize efforts between the Department of Education, Labor, and Agriculture. Federal agencies will partner with industry and nonprofits to develop online materials to teach students AI basics and critical thinking skills. Be nice if we just had a logic class. We could have that, like classical logic class, then you wouldn't need it, but that's besides the point. That said, though, Idaho stands to benefit significantly from this push. Our state can use federal dollars to strengthen STEM programs and give rural educators access to AI teaching tools. The order also directs the Department of Labor to create AI-related apprenticeships, which could provide our students with high-skilled job pathways. But like any powerful tool, AI requires users to understand how to wield it ethically and effectively. This executive order recognizes that we must prepare our young people, or children in this case, to be creators and leaders in tomorrow's economy. Not just consumers of technology, they actually know how to wield it. Hey, hold on one second. I know we've been talking about some great stories, but do you not want to miss out about learning about Idaho? If not, make sure to subscribe or follow us so you don't miss any of our future content. Also, consider checking out our Substack. We've got some pretty cool content over there. And coming to the last part of our midweek report here, our state's hydropower sector faced serious challenges over the past few years. For any of you that do a lot of fishing, you will know. Drought and rising temperatures pushed generation to historic lows, reaching levels not seen since 2001. Idaho's river basin dropped to just 60% of normal capacity by early October, while our neighbors in Oregon and Washington watched their hydropower output plummet 20% between 2021 and 2023. But all that to say, there is good news to be said. The U.S. Energy Information Administration expects Northwest hydropower to jump 17% compared to last year. Partly, if you remember our past reports talking about the amount of extra water we've been getting. While we're still running about 4% below our 10-year average, the trend points upward. Idaho benefits from the Snake River Basin, which forecasters predict will see above to near normal water supply this year. The increased precipitation across the northern regions this past winter and spring helps boost reservoir levels that feed our dams, something that you probably already know. This recovery matters to our state, if you didn't, about our economy and energy independence. Hydropower provides clean, reliable, and cheap, most of all, electricity that supports our communities and industries. While we're not back to peak levels yet, it does point to steady generation ahead and hopefully consistent cheap power for Idaho and the Pacific Northwest. And speaking of the wonderful buzzword inclusivity, and actually being in a good way in this case, Castle Hill Parks in northwest Boise welcomed families back this week as the city reopened a brand new inclusive playground. The previous structure burned down in an arson fire back in February of 2024. I remember reporting on that before we got a new format. Leaving families without their playground for over a year. The new playground goes beyond what was there before. City planners designed it so children with disabilities can play alongside everyone else. The equipment includes wheelchair-accessible ramps, sensor panels, wonder how long those will last out in the great outdoors, at the right height, and smooth surfaces that mobility devices can navigate easily. Community members voted on the design features after the fire destroyed the old equipment. The rebuild restores playground access for about 855 households within 10 minutes walk of it. The playground also features a communication board with symbols in English, Spanish, and Braille, plus information about Idaho artist James Castle, who attended the Idaho School for Deaf and Blind. So, not too crazy leftist, just trying to allow more kids to enjoy the playground. And speaking of something that children generally enjoy, Chick-fil-A, but in a sadly legal turn of events, a former cook at the Ammon Chick-fil-A has filed a lawsuit against the franchisee owner, Lauren Mosteller, claiming he faced repeated racial harassment from coworkers and supervisor. Thomas Wade, who worked at the restaurant from December 2022 until October 2023, alleges that fellow employees called him racial slurs and references to slavery. The court documents detail multiple incidences where Wade says coworkers used terms like ape, monkey, and worse, with some reportedly writing slurs on freezer walls. Wade claims he reported these incidents about 25 to 30 times to management, but saw no action taken. He was fired in October of 2023, which he believes was retaliation for his complaints. As for reactions on this, the Idaho Human Rights Commission investigated and found, quote, probable cause, end quote, that illegal discrimination occurred. The Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission reached a similar conclusion. Mollester denies all allegations and states that this is the first lawsuit the franchise has faced in 14 years of operation. She emphasized her commitment to maintaining an inclusive workplace. The case will now go to mediation before potentially heading to a trial. These are serious allegations that our legal system will need to sort through carefully, as both racial harassment and false accusations cause real harm to people and communities. And on a much happier note, sometimes the best way forward involves looking back. Star just received a piece of history that shows Idaho communities working together. That would be a century-old bridge that once carried cars over the Payette River in Horseshoe Bend, now spans a slough at Star's Freedom Park. Built in 1908, this truss bridge showcases the craftsmanship that Idaho's early builders possessed. As for history on it, when Horseshoe Bend needed to replace their old bridge, they didn't just scrap it. Instead, they split it in half through the state program that relocates historic bridges. Star took one half of their bridge, saving about $800,000 compared to building a new one. The other half now stays in Horseshoe Bend as a veterans memorial. Mayor Trevor Chadwick marveled at how ironworkers built the bridge without today's technology. Something as a little bit of a history lesson, they used hot rivets, placing everything by hand rather than having the wonderful rivet guns we have today. As for Star's half, they plan to name it Fowler's Bridge, after the original builders, and surround it with a veterans garden. which I have to head there. Thank you for listening to the entire report. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If you like the Midweek Report, make sure to check out our other content. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on Twitter by tweeting us at @LocalYoLo_Idaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.